Welcome to Activate Yourself with Geeta, Sidhu, Robb, where we feature otherwise normal people who, because of events in their life, have turned left and done unusual, inspiring, incredible things. Like build a business, become a happiness expert, marry a prince, create an empire, or like your host, set up a health and wellness business, Nosh Detox. Here's your host, Geeta, Sidhu, Robb.
Hi, my name is Geeta, Sidhu, Robb, and this is Activate Yourself. So you know how we always like to actually give you people who inspire you and who make life better. And part of that is people that kind of go through life and then something happens and they kind of turn left and they think, okay, this is what I'm now going to do. And it's their superpower. And today we have somebody who is personally somebody that I like and as a friend, but it's also somebody who does this, but for other people. And I think the whole thing about being of service, when you know you're being of service, is it's a very special route to take because you know that you're the person that's going to help make people's lives better. So I know that sounds a bit kind of mysterious, but it's not. All will become clear. So I say hi to Natalie. Natalie, welcome.
Hi, it's great to see you.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining me. So the thing with what you do is that when people have kids that have special needs, it's really difficult because I know my son didn't really have, I mean, maybe now if we look back, we'd have said he had educational special needs, but he had other, like his food and everything, but there was no solution. It was only what I knew to do and I could do, and it was incredibly difficult to find anything. And what you do is you step into helping parents of special needs kids how to just have happier kids, a better relationship, an easier family life, because having a child with special needs is incredibly painful for families, isn't it?
Painful and just emotionally draining for the parent.
Yeah.
And it's much like you were saying, you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know where to go. And in the meantime, maybe you're not sleeping at night because the child's up, or you're stressed, or both. And it's thinking clearly of how to go through this. The system is difficult. There's a lot of jargon. And you see the jargon, you're like, I have no idea what that means. I don't even know who to ask. I don't know who the first port of call is. And we get that a lot. Or people that have gone to all sorts of different solutions that aren't solutions. Professionals out there that can't offer them what they're looking for. So they come to me.
How do they know? Okay, let's go back to the basics on this, because like I know we were talking about SEN and all this, and I'm like, what the hell was all that? And so I didn't understand any of the language that you used, and it really took me a while. And can we just assume people don't understand? What Absolutely. Is a child with special needs?
So it can range. So they could have a genetic disorder, like Down syndrome, where you would probably know at birth, if not before. Or they could get to the point where they should be talking and they're behind their peers. So you go to a play group and all the other kids are chattering about, and your kid doesn't do that. And it's heartbreaking. Or they maybe...
Oh, you feel so bad. You feel like a failure and you feel like you're hurting your child.
Absolutely. Or it could be also physical. So maybe all the other kids are running or walking or pulling themselves up, and yours is 2 years old and still can barely sit. So there's all those things where you're like, something is not right. And it comes, it's a different journey for everybody. Some people get to school and they think it's fine. And then all of a sudden the teacher's saying, your kid doesn't really have functional language. And like you were saying, that's kind of a jargony thing. And you're thinking, well, of course he does. He talks all the time. And really he's scripting television shows, and none of it is useful per se. It's just him going through a script of a show or a book or something.
So you mean he's not actually having a conversation, he's
Absolutely,
repeating words he knows.
Absolutely. Okay. So it can sound like they have a massive vocabulary in that case, and they're using these big words, but they actually don't know what they mean. They can't use them to ask you.
So what we're doing is children are not fulfilling kind of the common accepted markers for development.
Right, exactly. The developmental expectations. Yes.
Okay, now you're a parent and you've worked out your child has special needs.
Mhm.
And then what normally happens without somebody like you?
Um,
I would think I would panic the crap out.
Yeah.
And I would go to the medical profession because there isn't anywhere else to go.
Yeah, so people do go to the medical profession. Sometimes they don't know who to go to. They'll go to the GP. Sometimes the GP puts you off and says, oh no, just give them another 6 months or a year or two. Usually often it's 2 years. They don't want to see anything before 2 years.
Oh, should you do that? 2 years old.
2 years old, yeah.
But is that a good thing?
Not, I mean, from my perspective, no.
Because there's so much you could be doing before that.
The earlier the intervention, the better. Sometimes you ask your friends. So maybe I ask you, I'm like, Geeta, what do you think? Is my child okay? And you say, oh gosh, no, mine were all different. And that's true. But if you can have some intervention straight away, it's never going to hurt them. You're never going to have a child that has, 10 years from now is hurting because they had a special intervention. Now maybe they can talk more than they couldn't, and they start out school at a better place than they were. Or there is something bigger and they do need longer term interventions and specialists.
How do you, because a parent like this has got to be, there's two things here that come to mind. One is the bit about being the parent of a special needs child, which we'll get to in a minute. But the other thing is that that was what I found really interesting about you. You were saying that you were in school and the things that you were being asked to teach these kids was so what's the word?
Relevant. Yeah.
Relevant that you were just like, no. Tell me about that.
So I was teaching a nursery and reception autism class. There was 2 kids that were communication needs and didn't have autism, but basically children that had very little language at the age of 3 to 5. They also had their social skills were behind, their physical taking care of themselves skills were behind. So I have to follow the national, meanwhile I'm following the national curriculum.
And which country are you in here?
I'm in London.
Okay.
I'm in London at this point. So I have to follow the national curriculum. And it's saying I need to teach religion, and these children can't. I think one of them was toilet trained out of 6. One of them was toilet trained. None of them could put their shoes on or their coat on or their,
Wait, how old were they?
3 to 5.
And what were you supposed to teach them in religion because they didn't have even basic skills?
Well, I know. And that's it really angered me that I have to follow. And at the same school, there was an assembly one week. It was the same week, actually. And the older children had this bust of Henry VIII that they supposedly made. Obviously, the teacher made it. And I just thought, this is so, like, why are we teaching them about that? Because those kids, a lot of those are still not toilet trained. They're not doing the simple, some of them can't feed themselves, to the expectations that we'd like. So I just thought, why are we doing this? Like, why are we sticking to this national curriculum so strongly when it's just not relevant to these lives? And why aren't we looking at the skills? And after that, I started working in, well, kind of 2 things happened. One of the parents asked me to work in her home because her son would cry every time they went to see the grandmother. He loved the grandmother. And she's like, I just don't understand. He loves my mother. Why is he crying? And I said, do you tell him where you're going? And she's like, of course I tell him. I said, well, do you show him? Do you show him a picture of your mother? And she said, oh, no, why would I do that? And I said, well, his processing isn't, his auditory processing isn't great. Let's show him a picture of your mother. Just say, oh, we're going to Nana's, get in the car and go. So she started doing that. And it was like revolutionary. But she didn't know what to do. And I said, well, don't the people that come to your house help you with this? And she said, what people that come to my house? And when I had been in the States, I had been the early intervention people that worked with behaviors and helped the families and helped them problem solve at home and taught them things like use visual supports, but that didn't exist here. Certainly 15 years ago, it didn't. There's a bit more now. So I started working with her son at home, doing the same things I was in the US. And then I moved to a private SEN school, and that was fantastic because although
what does SEN mean again?
Special educational needs.
Okay.
So in that school, we definitely catered to the needs of the children a lot more because we didn't have to rigidly keep to the national curriculum to the same extent.
But those schools are horrendously expensive.
Yes, a lot of time. Yeah, they are. a lot of times what parents will do, well, when I first started, almost all the parents paid, but what other parents can do is have the council pay. So you have, as part of the EHCP, you name that school as the school you'd like your child to go to. It's often a fight, but I think it's worth it if it's the right school for your child. But it depends on the school, because there's fantastic state schools. I worked at a different state school that is amazing. My friend's still there and is absolutely outstanding.
Okay, so what is it that makes the difference with a special needs child when you see them in an environment that supports them? You know, what is it? Just give me the high level, then we're going to go for a break, and then when we come back, you can give me more detailed things. I have the special needs child, and I find the right environment. How do I know it's the right environment? What is it that I'm going to get back?
So you know that the people that work there are engaged. When you go there, you see that they're engaged. They're interested in learning. They have specialist training. That's probably the biggest thing.
What does that mean?
It depends on the need again, but they'll have additional trainings that focus on the need. So it could be, recently I went to dyslexia school, and they are all trained in helping children with dyslexia. So they all have reading and writing and math interventions that specifically target children that have dyslexia. Whereas another school for another need would have different interventions. Okay,
so we're going to go for a quick break. And then we'll be back. And I want to talk also about how, having a child is so hard. Your first child, even then your second. I think by the time I got to my third, I was like, yeah, whatever. And you throw them all in with each other. But the first two really are brutal. And then you add in special needs. I mean, I think parents just don't get enough medals for this sort of thing, so I'd love to talk about that when we come back. So we're just going to go to
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
So we're back. What is it? Because the interesting thing about this is that you foresaw your life, because you had this training and then you ended up with a child with special needs.
Yep, I did. So I have my children very close together. They're only 13 months apart.
Wow.
So the older one is the autistic one. And I think that kind of what I'm saying to you, that you have to have someone that's bouncing back and saying, I think you should get this checked out. I was concerned about her probably at 17 months. And people were saying to me, oh no, I think it's okay. Just give her more time.
And you knew what to look for.
And I knew what to look for. Right. And so did some of them, because a lot of my friends work in SAN. But I was also really tired because I had two babies effectively. So I do think part of her journey is me having a second child so close and being, focused on, I really have a hard time differentiating her issues and having a baby. But they always ask you when you go into a doctor, tell me about your pregnancy, tell me about the early life. And I always say, well, then I had another baby. So it is hard to differentiate those two things. They really overlap for me. But by 18 months, I was really concerned by 18 months. By 2 years, we went into her 2-year health visitor check. And the health visitor is saying, let's put her down this route, which again, it was really interesting because I knew what it meant. And there's been so many times where I thought, why don't parents know? And then I realized that there's so much jargon that kind of skirts the issue, but doesn't exactly say. So they said, let's put her down the social communication rate. So I knew immediately that's autism, but I can't tell you that your kid has autism because I can't diagnose, and neither could the woman that I was seeing. So I knew what she was saying, but that moment was like a light bulb for me. Oh, it's because what they're hearing is it's not autism, where I heard it is autism. So
you knew that symptom meant autism, and
I knew that was that's a.
Okay, I need you
that's
to
a better
I
word.
need you to explain autism to me. I keep hearing it as a word. I don't understand it.
So autism is a triad of impairments with communication being one, socialization.
These are the problems that autistic children have.
Yeah. So you can have,
And processing.
yeah, yeah. Well, yes. So you can have some traits, but not be autistic, just like you have some traits of ADHD or whatever. So you have to have impairment. You have to be set back in the area, in all the areas. So like, for example, my daughter is her speech is very delayed. So now she's 5. She probably has about 500-600 words. Again, she does script things. She's improved. So she'll sing songs, but she does understand them. So for example, last week she was doing Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill, and she had 2 dolls and she took them up the stairs, and then she kept throwing them down. And I was like, that is brutal.
It's like Jack and Jill came down quickly.
Right? They fell down the hill. And I was like, oh gosh, that is something. But she gets it. So was my point. Something that she did was she had very repetitive play. So one reason I actually didn't think it was autism, I knew there was certainly an issue, was she had good play skills. And a lot of children don't have play skills at all, where she would feed dolls and she would.
So this is really, what I'm hearing you say is that this is actually a problem, because there's a diagnosis, but then there's a spectrum.
Oh yeah,
And
absolutely.
the child can be at any stage on that spectrum.
And also because she's a girl, so all the tests and everything were assumed that mostly men and boys were autistic.
Oh, there's a surprise.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Gender health kept alive and well.
Yeah, so what happens is girls often have intense interests, or something that a lot of autistic people have, but girls often have intense interests that mimic or typical for their age. So maybe it's like Bluey for a small child, and unicorns, and then it's later on it's an actress or an actor, or a movie, but it's a movie that's their friends watch, but they don't watch it in the same way. They're repetitively watching the same movie, whereas boys will be interested in like train tracks, not even just the trains, the train tracks or bus schedules. I had a little boy I work with, and you could tell him a bus route, and he's like, yes, that goes from Piccadilly Circus to, and you're like, okay, cool.
This is like the bits where like you have autistic children making those incredibly detailed drawings.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Often, in fact, that's the thing. So they often look at the details more so than a neural will look at the big picture. So I'm looking behind you and I see flowers, and I have an idea where you're sitting, where an autistic person might just look at the sunflowers and
yeah, and
focus on that. So there's great positives to that, because they can really focus in on an area and know that area and become an expert in something. But then other times they don't notice the big picture. So when you're out, perhaps they're looking at a flower and don't notice that there's a car coming towards them and they need to get out of the way.
Oh, okay. Now,
So
what is it that when you've got a child, that do we have more children like this now, or is it that we're more aware of it, or is it
more aware? It could be both, but I think it's probably that we're more aware. Certainly there's a lot of adults getting diagnosed with all sorts of things. My husband was diagnosed ADHD last spring. I told him 15 years ago I thought he had ADHD, but
And what did that manifest as? How did that present?
So the reason that he finally listened to me was because he was struggling with work, and especially he said, I hate when they have me come into a meeting and then I start working and then they call me in and I have to go to another meeting and I can't refocus then after the meeting. So then I have 2 hours to work, and then they call me and they talk to me about something else, or I have to go to another meeting and I can't refocus. I said, yeah, it's because you have ADHD and you can't, the transition is too much for you. You need to focus. And when he focuses, he can focus, but then being pulled out is too hard for him to get back in. And he definitely, he talks fast. He's always been kind of flighty flighty is the wrong word, but he'll go from one thing to the next. But the biggest was the work issue. He also did, the reason I don't think it was caught when he was younger was he did really well in school.
You see, this is it. As long as you get the grades, people just ignore you and let you do whatever you do.
Absolutely. So he did really well. And then he went into study. I mean, it's just typical. He studied aeronautical engineering. So he did A levels. He did advanced maths. He did physics, all that. And he didn't learn how to study. He didn't learn because he didn't need to. He just learned it. He said he reviewed for his GCSEs and A levels, but he didn't really learn good study skills. So then he got to university and he's studying rocket scientist, he's a rocket science, and he really struggled with it. And I went back to,
because intelligent people just managed to, like my daughter said this,
so he got there, he's studying like the hardest subject, one of the hardest subjects that he could have studied, and he didn't have any skills to know how to study. So he really, really struggled at university. And that's me last year. I'm saying it's not because you're not smart, it's because you didn't have those skills, because your executive functioning isn't good and you have ADHD. And he's like, oh, so he finally went, and he came out of the meeting, it was on Zoom, and he's like, well, that was damning.
I have ADHD.
He's like, literally everything the doctor said. I'd be like, well, here's the story. He's like, okay. So,
well, I found that I was interviewing a woman recently who talked about high sensory people. I
listened to that. It was fascinating because I have some of those things too.
Right.
The smell, especially the smell.
And I listened to her and I went, shit, that's me. Like the whole way through this conversation. And I haven't listened to the episode, but there was literally a moment of complete, oh, what, in my brain, because I was like, everything she's saying, she was talking about supermarkets. I hate supermarkets. Yeah. And she said, I go into supermarkets at 9 a.m. when they turn down the music and the light. I'm like, you can do that? Oh my God, I might be able to go into a super, because I can't do that. I cannot physically. And I was listening to, I went for Pilates today, and she said to me, do you know that we've been playing music the whole session? I was like, no, I didn't even think about it because I can't handle the noise of music. But she'd been playing a sitar music because she's a yoga teacher. Sitar music the whole way through, and sitar is Indian classical music, which I grew up with, and has a much different, it has kind of six
feel,
well, it also has 16. I'm not a musician, so instead of 8 octaves, which is normally, it has 16, and so the way the music goes is very, very different, and it doesn't hurt my brain. It doesn't make my ears want to bleed. Whereas Rachmaninoff, I am under a sofa with my ears covered because I'm weeping and my ears and my nose are bleeding and I cannot cope. So it's so interesting to come to this stuff as an adult. Yeah, there's a feeling where you feel stupid, and then there's a sense of massive relief. But we're going to go for a break, and then when we come back, I want you to tell me why you go into people's houses. Like, why didn't you set up a school? Why you go into people's houses and do what you're doing, right? So we're just going to go on a break now.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
We're back. Why going into people's houses?
So I want to see, I mean, when I was in the US, we did that because the families were struggling and they didn't know how to implement things like I said, the pictures, or how to do, from my perspective, basic things, because I've been trained in them, and I know I had that training and they didn't. So we teach them skills with the idea that eventually the child would learn, the parents would learn, and we'd step back. So that was the idea. That's the idea of early intervention.
Like having a maternity nurse when you bring your first baby home.
Yeah. So they teach you what you need to know, because again, you don't know what you're doing. And even if you have an older child, so maybe you have 2 children that are.
Yeah, but if one has special needs, you're starting
and
again.
The third one it's totally different. So how you deal with them can often be really different, and even different needs. So some children have like pathological demand avoidance. So if you say no, that just sets them off. So you create a different situation where you're not saying no, you're not just, So
where I grew up, that would have been called just being a child who doesn't know how to behave.
Yeah, and what I think historically, yeah.
Wow, a pathological.
But it's a demand avoidance.
I feel like I know a few men like that too.
Probably. And I think that, going back to what we were saying before, I think a lot is this getting more prevalent. Well, I think we're getting adults that have their child diagnosed with that are pretty needy. Maybe they're not speaking, and they have whatever, autism, ADHD, and the parents thinking, wait a minute, I had problems that are once they hear what all the traits are, and then they're going and getting diagnosed. because they didn't know, and the schools didn't know. There's a lot. I think we know a lot more now.
So when you're helping people to find someone to work in their home with their kids,
Mhm.
do those people then step out, as you were saying, or do they stay on, or how does that work?
It depends on the family. So
Like a nanny with training in a way, right?
So some people want a nanny. I'm looking for a nanny now, 2 nannies now, some overseas for clients. Yes. Actually the pandemic has brought out a lot of things too. So a lot of children with needs, especially as they get into adolescence, well, not always adolescents, but did better at home, homeschooling. So the parents are choosing to homeschool, and the children are thriving. So we're finding teachers for families. We also find teachers to go overseas because the schools don't have as much SEN support. So for example, I've sent a tutor for a boy who was dyslexic, and he had really bad executive functioning, kind of like my husband does. But he was taking IGCSE, so his intelligence level was very high. He just couldn't get himself situated to know what to study when. So we had a tutor go to him in Egypt for 2 years and worked with him, and then he did astonishingly well. But he needed that input of someone to
and
say.
And then the guy's now done after his 2-year stint.
Yeah, he's in university now.
All the skills he needs, and he's got it sorted.
Yeah, so like him, like if my husband had had that, he would have been a better time in university.
So is there a place, is it that the people that you send in, that must in some way, I'm thinking as a mother, it must also help how the family interacts.
Absolutely. I think that's, especially when children, well, not even when they're young, but it has a massive impact on the family. Because if the child's dysregulated and they're fine, they're saying, they're not able to say, I don't like the supermarket because the lights are blinky and it smells funny. And you're taking them into the supermarket because you're thinking, we need to buy food.
And they're having a tantrum.
And they're having a meltdown where they're screaming. Yeah. Now everyone's judging you. Everyone's looking at you, right? Why can't you control your 10-year-old that's thrown?
Except that when my children take me into the supermarket, I'm the one.
You're the person.
I'm the one going, no, I hate it here. Can't bear it.
So then, a lot of mothers, especially, I think, feel a lot of shame and embarrassment. Why can't their child do what everyone else is doing? And some home lives are really difficult because we have a lot of children that mask as well. So in school, they keep it all together and hold it in, and they get home and they're just like, and the parents get the brunt of the sometimes physical, sometimes shouting. It depends.
That is so hard. Okay, so you as the parent of a special needs child, although you're trained obviously as well, what have you found the things that have helped you to cope with this as a parent?
So I always thought that the parents struggled because they didn't have the training, and that was the only issue. And that's
I'm laughing.
not the only issue, because you're really just tired. You're tired.
Yeah.
So my husband went away 2 weeks ago, and she was up every single night. Every single night she was up. She was up from like 1 a.m. to 5 one morning, and then my son was up at 6. So I didn't sleep well, and when I don't sleep well, my patience, amongst other things, like your reasoning isn't good. So even though you have these skills, it's really hard to follow through. So again, I had 2 children in 13 months. So I had effectively had 2 babies. And like, I found that really difficult for my own needs. Your needs aren't met. So it's really hard to follow through, but also you can't know everything. So she sees a speech therapist and an OT and all these other people because I'm not a specialist in this. Oh, I'll give you another example. So she refused to put her tights on 3 days, last Friday, and then 2 days this week. So last Friday, I was fighting with her for probably about 45 minutes. And then I just eventually took her to school with no tights on, and she went into school and she put them on for the school. So then Monday, she wouldn't wear the tights or the jumper. And I just put her shoes on. I didn't fight with her. I just said, okay, fine. And I put them in her bag and we went to school. And she happily put them on for school because you have that.
Well, they're not you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Better if you're not there. And so what is it that, the thing with this stuff is it feels like it costs money. What do you do if you don't have the money for this?
It's really difficult. It is. If I'm being blunt, You have to fight. So like if you found a school, for example, like the school that I used to work at is fantastic. The school that I visited last week is really good for dyslexia. Especially, I think there's definitely gaps in boroughs. It depends on the borough. Like KNC is fantastic and will pay for anything. Where other boroughs, it's a fight.
I'm convinced it's because most of the kids here go to private school, and so they
I think it's
have
partially that they don't. Yeah, so they'll pay for private schools, but they also don't have a special school.
Yeah.
So because they don't have one, they have to outsource it.
No, I mean, like they also have a bigger education leftover budget.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, and I'm sure. Yeah,
using it.
Yeah. So there's certain boroughs that are easier.
So if you live in England and you don't have money, then the thing to do is to shop for the right borough to go live in.
Absolutely. And also there are charities, because I don't really know as much about, but I've heard from some groups and I'm in that there's charities that help you pay for speech therapy, for example, or OT, or sometimes they'll help you buy something like an iPad, and then you can get so some children talk using an iPad. They'll point to the pictures and they'll make a sentence for them. In fact, the show that was just on last week, that man communicates with an iPad. He's nonverbal, he doesn't speak, but his communication via the iPad is amazing.
I love that, because software just enables you to do so many things that you couldn't. So I love that. What is the nicest thing about your job?
I love the impact. I love going to a family, and I'll go into a family and it's very emotional. They'll cry. It's, this whole journey, but then seeing the progress. I recently had a mother came back to me. I found a one-to-one for her about 3 years ago. It was before the pandemic, 4 years ago. And she said that her son got into Westminster. He studied inside. I mean, I think he was in year 2, year 3. When we found him, and he was really struggling with behavior. He was obviously bright, but his behavior, and he studied, and he just got into Westminster, and he was like,
this is like one of our best schools, right? Just for anyone who's kind of listening.
Yeah. And he wants to try boarding. So she came back and she said, we want to work on some social skills and some, he has anxiety. So they live in London, and Westminster's in London, but he wants to board. Yeah.
I love that. How can people find you if they would like to ask you?
My website is www.fireflyeducation.co.uk, or my socials. So Instagram is at Firefly Education London.
I love that. Thank you very much for joining me. That was fantastic. I wanted to have this education because it's something I know nothing about. And I remember and I just think the majority of us don't know enough about it. And we keep hearing these conversations and hearing things. And I wanted somebody who was a specialist to come and just tell me. So I feel educated. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
So this was Natalie Verbo. And, I just feel better. I think the fact that I understand how I can now have these conversations with other people. I understand when other people are having these conversations, what they're saying to me, because I do think that as parents, it's so difficult what we're doing. To be able to have then some understanding of what a parent's going through if their child has special needs has got to be a really great way to move forward. So I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. My name is Geeta, Sidhu, Robb, and this is Activate Yourself. And I look forward to inspiring you again soon.
Thank you so much for joining us. Our goal was to give you pause, make you think about your life, and inspire you to say, wow, what if I tried to do that? If they can do it, so can I. Did it work? Let us know by finding us on social media at Geeta, Sidhu, Robb, or at Nosh Detox. We upload new shows every 2 weeks here, and if you start to miss us, check us out on YouTube.